Hello everyone, it's Ryan back on the Syntax Byte. In this video, we're going to be talking about the 30-day Linux challenge that I'm going to be doing here on the channel. Now this challenge is inspired by the challenge that Linus and Luke did over at Linus Tech Tips, where they both changed their personal machines to use Linux for 30 days and documented the process, let us know about any issues they had, as well as other 30-day Linux challenges that have been done around YouTube. Now, just for a little bit of context, if you go back and look at the old videos on this channel, which you may not, be a subscriber here, so you may not know, but I use Linux full-time for about 2 years between, I would say, 2015 and 2017. And I stopped using Linux full-time in August of 2017. Now, one of the reasons I did that was just to get better software compatibility. I was going into university at the time and really needed, perfect compatibility with Microsoft Office. I could use it in a virtual machine, but I was going to be handing in assignments, and I really couldn't risk having something go wrong in the, sort of LibreOffice conversion issue, and losing marks because of that. But however, I am no longer a full-time student, so my personal machine has once again become my personal machine. I'm not using it for schoolwork. I'm just doing basically my personal tasks on the machine. I have a separate computer for work, so there's not really a concern in terms of that. That computer will, of course, be staying on Windows. That is not part of the 30-day Linux challenge, so this is just my personal machine that is part of the 30-day Linux challenge. And since I stopped using Linux in 2017, there's a few new features that have kind of made their way to the forefront that were just kind of in the background at the time. So Wayland, as well as the snaps and flatpaks. I'm going to be using Ubuntu, so it'll be snaps, but sort of these all-inclusive packages were really just coming about at the time. In addition, since I quit using Linux has gone from having a 1.79% market share on StatCounter in August of 2017 to 2.8 at this time, and that does exclude Chrome OS. So while it is very slow, Linux has been experiencing a very real change in market share and has been experiencing growth in not just raw numbers of users, but also its share of the market. So it'll be interesting to see if that improves software compatibility above and beyond where it was sort of in 2017. And I never had really any major issues in 2017. There were lots of games that I could play. Steam had been on Linux, but every now and then there were issues with software compatibility. Another reason why I'm choosing to do this now is that, so of course in 2017, like I mentioned, I just sort of switched to Windows. One of the issues was software compatibility, but really it was just that I screwed up my Arch install, and I was wondering what distribution to go to, and I just thought, what if I just installed Windows 10? At that point, I had not tried Windows 10, and I thought it might be interesting to try it and get better software compatibility for school. So I went that route. I installed Windows 10. I'm still running that exact same install of Windows 10 on that exact same computer right now. So it's going about 5 years strong. But this is the perfect time, because not only do I not need to use that, as a work computer anymore for school, but I also have sort of reached a point in this Windows install where I only had a 250 gigabyte SSD and it's pretty much full. So I added a 500 gigabyte SSD, but it's not my C drive. So there are some issues where my C drive kind of continually fills up and I have to try and shuffle stuff over to the other side of the SSD, which is easier said than done for some things. So now would be a natural time to just go ahead and give Windows a reinstall. I would say Windows has been surprisingly stable for being a 5-year-old install with lots of random crap that's been installed over time. Windows has generally, and so do many Linux distributions, have a way of just sort of over time becoming less stable as more and more of the system is updated and installed and changed, and the system sort of it builds up a sort of certain technical debt that leads to just a less stable system, and a fresh install helps eliminate that for a while, and then again the same technical debt starts to build up. But I'm kind of at a position where there's not too much of that going on. It's mostly just the issue with the C drive that would lead me to want to reinstall Windows. But I figure, hey, if you're going to reinstall Windows anyway, you're going to go through the task of backing up your data and all that. Why not just do a 30-day Linux challenge? And so that's what I'm going to do. We'll see after 30 days if I want to continue using Linux or if I do want to go ahead and reinstall Windows 10. But we're going to give it a try. We're going to see what's changed. It's been 5 years since I was a full-time Linux user, but I did use Linux full-time for 2 years, so I do certainly know my way around the system. And yeah, I'm really excited about it. So to start the challenge, the first thing I'm doing right now is just backing up my data. It is going to take forever. It looks like right now there's an estimate of it was about 16 hours. It's changed to about 29 minutes because it's going through a real big file right now, but those won't last. So probably won't be done tonight. Then I'm going to do some benchmark testing on games because I know in some of the past challenges there's been an issue of do games perform as good on Linux as they do on Windows. So we'll do a couple FPS tests, nothing super scientific or benchmarky or whatever, but we'll just go into a couple games that I usually play, see what I'm getting in terms of FPS, and see if that's comparable on Linux or not. Of course, I will be using the proprietary drivers in Linux to get the optimum performance in the games that I do play, which is quite minimal, but I'm going to be playing Counter-Strike Global Offensive as well as Cities Skylines. So once I've done backing up the data and all the performance testing, I will throw Ubuntu 22.04 LTS on this thumb drive here, and I will go ahead and install it. And once that's done, I will bring you guys a quick update and let you know how the install process went. Hello all, so it is the next day and I have gone ahead and installed Ubuntu 22.04 on my system. Overall, the install went okay. I didn't have any super major issues, but it was not without its hiccups. So for one, initially the installer was not booted into EFI mode, and I did not discover this until I went and manually did my partitioning. At that point, it gave me an error about not having like a boot record partition. I looked up the error and someone mentioned that this meant that this install was not running in EFI mode and offered instructions how to check that. I did verify, and of course the install was not running in EFI mode. So from that point, I had to reboot and restart the installation process in EFI mode. After that, when I did my manual partitioning, I'm doing manual partitioning because I have 2 disks on my system, and so I want one of the disks to be used for the home folder and one of them to be used for the whole system. And received an error that said that it was unable to inform the kernel of the updated partitions. So I didn't really know what this meant, but I looked it up and I just figured I would continue on with the install. When the install finished, everything seemed okay and the system did boot. However, once I got to setting things up and installing things, very quickly I ran out of space on my home drive, which is very suspicious because it's 250 gigabytes. I went into the disk utility and it kept saying that it was just 100% full, even though there were only 400 megabytes of stuff on it. So I rebooted into the install drive and just tried resizing it. It said it didn't change the size, but once I resized it, it showed the proper amount full, and when I rebooted into the system, it was the same case. So I guess I just had to resize the partition and tell it that I really did want it to be that size for it to really recognize, oh, I have all this room. Now I do realize I did not really discuss my system specs in the previous video, and when it comes to issues that people are having, it's super important to understand the system specs. I mean, you might run into more issues if you're on a newer system compared with an older system. So I have an i5 6500 and a GTX 1060. So this hardware is not sluggish, but it is not a new hardware. It's hardware that's been around for 5 years or more now. And so it's not something where, it just came out and drivers are not yet available or drivers are not very good yet. This hardware should be able to be used to the full capability that it's able to be used in Windows, or it's unlikely that Linux will ever achieve that on this hardware while it's, still relevant. So aside from the brief installation issues and home drive issues, the only other issue I've had is that my webcam performance was initially very slow. So I am recording this video using GU-VC View. I have now found out how to get it, configuring codecs and everything to get it to somewhat acceptable. This is a solid 30 frames per second. I don't know how to get it to be more than that. However, I would still say it doesn't look particularly great. And I would like to get it bumped up to full 60 if I could. It's hovering right around 30 right now, but I don't know how to bump that up. And it's been taking me the better part of 2 hours to actually figure out how to use the webcam and get that set up and working. So otherwise it would it would look good in the preview, but then every time I would go to record, it was just very, very, very slow. And, like 7 frames per second, just unacceptable video quality. So it took a really long time to get it to where it is now, and it still doesn't even really look that good, I would say. So I will continue playing around with it as I do continue to make these, sort of videos. But so far, other than that, it's going all right. The only other issue I've had is that my sound device is non-persistent between reboots, so I have to always configure it to use my speakers, which it doesn't do by default. But hopefully I will find a workaround for that issue. And aside from that, I'm pretty happy with it. I watched a video where someone said that Ubuntu was really, really slow because it uses snaps for Firefox and stuff like that, and Firefox was starting really, really slow. And I would say it won't win any speed awards, but I would say that, Firefox starts up in an acceptable amount of time, in my opinion. It's not an issue that would push me off the distribution. The desktop does feel modern. This is one of the reasons I decided to go with Ubuntu over going with Linux Mint, was I just felt that Ubuntu was providing something that, with the new GNOME desktop that's kind of been configured to look a little bit like Unity used to. I felt that Ubuntu was providing something that was new and fresh and exciting to check out, and Linux Mint was really providing the same old desktop experience I've had so many times on Linux. And so that was one of the reasons I wanted to go with Ubuntu over Linux Mint, because, software compatibility between the two should be quite similar, but I felt that this was something that was a little bit more fresh, a little bit more modern, and as well has Wayland support, which I don't believe Linux Mint necessarily has Wayland support out of the box. So that is how the install process has gone. I'm able to get my emails and do web browsing and everything on this system. It's a non-issue. I will continue installing things and setting up the system today, as well as just using it for just general personal use. And I will be getting back to you guys with more updates very, very soon. So thank you for watching this far, and I'm excited to share the updates as I continue to set up the system. All right, everyone, it is Ryan back again on the Syntax Byte, and in this segment, I am nearing the end of 30 days with Ubuntu 22.04. And it's gone fairly smoothly. I just want to say that, it has not been a difficult experience at all. I've been able to accomplish playing games, I've been able to accomplish checking emails, I've been able to accomplish lots of web browsing, and I've even been able to start editing this video. Of course, the remainder of the video will be edited on Linux, but I have not yet finished the video, so I don't have too much to share in terms of the full editing experience at this time, but it will potentially be coming in a future segment as I'm finishing up editing this video. But so tomorrow marks the 24th of October, which is officially 1 month on Linux. And I wanted to share my thoughts, give an overview of how I've customized, or not really customized, the desktop, some of the applications I've been using, and the few struggles that I did have. So to start off with, the game performance. The game performance was on par with Windows. The only thing is I did notice some visual minor issues in CSGO. But aside from that, game performance in both City Skylines and CSGO was up to par. It was on par with Windows, and really nothing to complain about in that capacity. The one issue that I did have during my time on Linux was related to a system update, basically screwing up the NVIDIA driver. Basically what happened was I got a graphics error launching an application that I've used many times before, the Anki flashcard application. I thought, this is weird, and decided to do a system restart, and at that point my system never booted. And I kept seeing this thing about doing a check disk. I thought my file system had maybe been corrupted. But after a little while of searching, I did track it down and find out that the system had booted, despite the fact that it looked like it was not able to finish the boot process. I could add a certain key combo to get to the command line and basically remove NVIDIA's drivers from my system, and then just basically go from there, reinstall the drivers, and then I was able to boot the system again. Now, I would say I've been running this for a month. I ran Windows, the same install, for 5 years. I never had an issue like that with Windows where an update completely screwed up my computer and prevented it from booting. It is a bit of a distribution specific thing, but that is not a great record for Ubuntu 22.04. This is an LTS release. Keep in mind, this is not the bleeding edge release. This is an LTS release of Ubuntu 22.04, simply just taking an official system update, to my knowledge, screwed up my system. I don't know exactly what update it was, but it just prevented my system from booting again. I was able to figure it out, but it did give me a downtime of about 2 hours while I was doing that, because it was initially looking in the wrong place. I was looking at the check disk issue. So in my mind, that's not really a great user experience. As far as other things go, I would say that I've been able to use most of the applications that I want to use. I was able to do a video call using Zoom. However, I would say the version of Zoom that's available on Linux just doesn't feel as polished as the versions of Zoom that are available on Mac and Windows. It just is not quite exactly the same experience. All the basic functionality is there, but it is just not as polished of an experience. Aside from that, I was able to use Firefox, which works beautifully as long as you're using it in X. If you try to watch videos in Firefox under Wayland, it just doesn't work very well. I did later realize after doing some reading on the Arch Wiki that this was probably because Firefox wasn't running in Wayland mode. It was running with like X Wayland rather than running in an official Wayland mode. But again, it's something that should just really work out of the box. It's not something I should have to fiddle with. It's not something I should have to change settings in order to get to work. Videos were just really, really laggy in Firefox under Wayland. And also under Wayland, Spotify had a blinking issue where the screen would just flicker. Again, this is gone in X. So after the first couple days, I just never used Wayland again and switched my session to X, and that solved a lot of problems. Just seems that Wayland isn't quite there in terms of the prime time yet, so if you want to minimize your issues on Linux, I just highly recommend using X unless you have a reason that you need to use Wayland. So with all that being said, I think I'm going to go ahead and give a quick tour of the Ubuntu desktop. So I'm going to switch to using OBS for the recording, and we can have a quick look at the software and applications that I've been using, as well as just a brief tour of my Ubuntu desktop. Alright, so here we are on my Ubuntu desktop. You can see that I have not made very many changes at all from the original state of the desktop. So I've just added my icons and such of my favorite used applications over on the bar here. I've gone ahead and reduced the icon size a little bit, but aside from that, I haven't really made many visual tweaks. I think one of the reasons I chose Ubuntu in the first place was that it looks pretty good out of the box. There's not a lot of need to make a lot of visual tweaks, and if I wasn't sure if I was going to be using something for more than a month, it really wasn't worth investing a lot of time in a lot of visual tweaks to an operating system if I don't know if I'm going to keep the install around. So didn't go ahead and invest too much in any visual tweaks for the operating system. Everything, I didn't even add any panel applets or anything like that. Everything here is basically just stock. Looking at some of the applications I have here that I've installed, of course, a lot of these are Ubuntu default, so I won't really cover them, but Anki is something that I use for flashcard training for learning French. It's very popular within the language learning communities, and it helps me to retain words that I learn while I'm, listening or reading stuff in French. Of course, I've installed a couple of games, so Cities Skylines and Counter-Strike Global Offensive both ran very well on Linux with minimal issues. Like I said, in CSGO, there were a couple things that just textures on the walls, for instance, I noticed sometimes were flickering, which just wasn't as ideal as Windows. So I would say that while it works very well and the frame rates are perfectly acceptable, you do see the occasional graphical glitch that I don't believe is present on Windows. We have the deconf editor, which I use to disable mouse acceleration briefly, but I actually decided I liked it better with mouse acceleration, so that's fine. We have GIMP, just doing some basic image manipulation, and of course what will be used to make the thumbnail of this video. GUVC View is what I was using to record earlier. I covered earlier in the video how I had many issues with the webcam. That was one of the things that did definitely cause me a few more issues than I would like, and I think it took up a lot of my time. That and when I had to fix the system with it breaking after an update, what are the two times I would say that I really ended up spending a lot of time troubleshooting the system when I shouldn't have needed to, and it prevented me from doing tasks that I wanted to do. Kdenlive is a video editor. Not too much to say there. It's worked fairly well. I did notice that with one of the files, it was quite slow to move between cuts. which isn't really acceptable, to be honest. Like I shouldn't be waiting at all for it to move between cut portions of video. That's just a little bit weird. But other than that, Kdenlive is what is being used to edit this video. So if you're listening to me right now, it's been edited in Kdenlive, unless something's changed from this clip, in which case you'll find out later in the video. Language support, LibreOffice, this is all installed by default. I did go ahead and install Minecraft as well. I didn't have any frame rates to compare to from Windows, but the frame rate was certainly perfectly acceptable and nothing to worry about there. MPV was installed as the default. Video playback compatibility was not very good. Of course, we have the NVIDIA X server settings as I'm using the proprietary drivers. OBS Studio is what I'm using to record the screen right now. All the rest of this was installed by default. I'm not sure what Remina is or why it was installed by default, but I assume it was installed by default. Aside from that, we have Transmission was installed by default as well. I really have little use for a BitTorrent client these days, though. Visual Studio Code was something I installed, and then VLC Media Player, as well as Zoom. So the Zoom client does work well, well enough at least for basic meetings. However, I would say that the client just is not quite in the same place as the Mac and Windows counterparts. Furthermore, I installed Zoom via a snap. If we go to here, it is installed via a snap. There doesn't appear to be any updates available, but every time I open the Zoom client, it says that there is an update available. So it also has very poor reviews, I guess. So I would say that it does seem that one of the advantages of Linux used to be that your package manager would handle most installs, and then it would update all your software as well, which avoids the whole Windows problem of every application having to figure out how to, update itself, and you have annoying Java updater all the time nagging at you to update it and all this other software. And it saves developers time because they don't have to write updaters into their software. Provides a more consistent user experience because users don't have to update each software in a different way. I mean, those are kind of the main advantages, and this used to be one of the main advantages of Linux. But I found, with snaps, a lot of them are just unfortunately outdated, even if they are in the official Ubuntu repos. So I haven't gone ahead and accepted the Zoom client update, but maybe that's part of the problem with it, is that it's just a dated build of the Zoom client. And yeah, so that's pretty much it in terms of the applications I've been using. I think like a lot of users, a good amount of what I'm doing on my computer on a day-to-day basis is just web browsing. Most of my time is spent in Firefox. Some of it is spent in Thunderbird. I guess this is the rest of the applications. So we didn't mention, I have Firefox and Thunderbird, which were of course included by default, and then Spotify is installed as well as Steam for games. Thunderbird, I did have to install an extension to get one of my Exchange email accounts working. That extension unfortunately is not free. It has a 30-day trial, and so as of like tomorrow, I will not be able to actually use that extension and check that mail anymore. That's not a super frequently used account, so I could work around that by just, using the web-based version of Outlook, and then that would work as well. But just something to note, I thought was interesting. We think of Linux as a free operating system that's helping save people money, but as soon as you're spending money on, checking your email, it starts to lose that advantage a little bit. So with that being said, I'm going to hop back around to the other camera to share my final thoughts on this Linux challenge and let you guys know, will I be switching back to Windows? Alright, so I've shared my experience using Ubuntu 22.04 for 30 days. And overall, it was not too bad. There were a few issues I ran into. There was a few times I had to fight with it. But overall, it was a fairly easy experience. I was able to do most of the things that I wanted to do. Actually, I think I was able to do pretty much everything that I wanted to do in due time, almost as well or as well as I would be able to on Windows. However, my system breaking after an update stands out as a very bad experience. As well, the webcam issue was not good, and the application compatibility leaves a little bit to be desired still. I would say it's quite good, and it's certainly very usable for most people, but why would I settle for a worse version of Zoom when I could have the good version of Zoom on Windows? And I think, that's what it comes down to when we want to answer the question at the end of this video. Will I remain on Linux? I've challenged myself to use Linux for 30 days, to really give it a chance to impress me, to frustrate me, and it hasn't really impressed me, but it has been able to frustrate me. And I think at the end of the day, that's, tells me that I should switch back to Windows. So to be clear, this isn't something that I'm going to be doing tomorrow. I'll probably wait until next weekend, of course, as it's much easier to mess around with your personal computer on the weekend unless you have an emergency. So I'll continue to use Ubuntu for a little while longer, but I do intend to eventually switch this computer to Windows again. At this point, I don't really see any major advantages to using Ubuntu, though I do see some definite drawbacks. The risk of more failures after updates, the risk of applications not being up to date, and just generally having a slightly poorer user experience. That being said, this computer cannot run Windows 11, and Windows 10 is on a timeline. I do intend to replace the computer before Windows 10 support is dropped, but if that did not happen for whatever reason, I would see Linux as a viable alternative to continue receiving system updates. And of course, if it was the choice between Windows, which wasn't receiving system updates, and Linux, which is receiving security updates, I would pick Linux every time. But given that I have two operating systems, Windows is a sunk cost, so while it is not free for me to use it, it is a sunk cost. I don't really see any reason to remain on Linux at this time. It's not really providing a better user experience, and for that reason I will be switching back to Windows. So I hope the 30-day Linux challenge was helpful or interesting to a few people. Definitely go ahead and give it a try yourself if you are curious about Linux. I do think Linux is good, but I wouldn't say that the desktop impressed me with how far it's come in the past few years. I think it's been very, very stagnant. And some things were actually worse, to be honest, like making sure that all my applications were up to date in one central place used to be a huge advantage of Linux, and with having to choose between snaps and depackage packages, different repositories. Sometimes there was a traditional version of the package and a snap. Sometimes the snaps weren't up to date. It just wasn't a good experience in that capacity, and I wouldn't say that's an advantage of Linux anymore at this point. It was actually quite frustrating and sad to see. So in general, I've been a little bit disappointed by the progress that's been made over the past couple of years. But it's definitely always good to check out other things besides Windows, and hopefully maybe, I will keep a little bit more up to date on what's going on in the Linux community, and if something draws my eye, I know I can feel free to install it on my computer, and I know I will be able to have good enough application compatibility to get me by. So without further ado, guys, thank you so much for watching this video. It's been Ryan on the Syntax Byte. Normally here on the channel we do sort of programming videos and the like. If that's something that interests you, definitely go ahead and click that subscribe button. Like the video if you found it entertaining or interesting, and I'll see you in the next video.